ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of What's Happening. I'm George Binns, and the guest this evening is Rene Soriano. I like the Italian to it. And as you can probably tell from the banner at the bottom of the picture and from the props we got up here, Rene is the oldest game inventor still functioning. And our associate at the Y, Ron, explained it to me the other day that about a week or so ago you celebrated the 50th anniversary of your 39th birthday. Congratulations. So you've been in the game business for quite a while. How'd you get started? Did you go to school to become a game designer, or you just pick it up, or how'd it go?
It's a long story, but to shorten it a little bit, I was asked to invent a game. I knew nothing about games or game inventing. I had played some games when I was a kid, of course, but I had no interest in games. So somebody asked me. I did not know I could not do it, so I tried it. I invented 3 games for this licensor of games and toys, and one of them was licensed.
Oh, okay.
That's this one. This was in the early 60s that I did that game for Ideal Toys. That's a manufacturer of games, toys, dolls in New York City. And which is interesting. Little did I know at that time that eventually I would go work at Ideal Toy.
Oh, did you? Yeah.
About 10 years later, I think it was, I went to work for Ideal Toy.
So what's this other one?
Oh, okay. I brought this one because most people nobody's ever seen this one, but
not a big seller.
But millions of people have seen this one and have taken it home. Many in its original box, which was a big, tall box. In those days, games were sold with television, and also because of their prominence on the shelf. And sometimes the larger the box, people would notice it more.
Okay.
And so nowadays, we've come a long way. Boxes have been reduced in size.
Yeah.
A lot of it has to do with being shipped from China.
Yeah.
And the volume of a box adds to the cost. The bigger the box, the more cost.
Yeah.
So I brought a box to show this was my first big hit.
When you're going to invent a game, do you start off with a direction from somebody, say, we want a game about? Or do they say, hey, go invent a game? Or how do you get started in this?
Okay. There are many ways. When I worked at Parker Brothers would get access to a license, like Strawberry Shortcake. And when they had access to a license, or the rights to a license, they would do a card game, a board game, and sometimes a 3-dimensional game, which I did. The first year I ever got to Parker Brothers, they had just gotten the Strawberry Shortcake license, and they asked me to do a game for that license. And I had been developing a game. And when you work internally with a manufacturer like Parker Brothers, you're working with marketing people. And you're taking direction from the marketing people. Mm-hmm. And so it's their responsibility to guide the creation or the development of a game to the point where they think they can market it. So you, in that case, when you're working internally for a manufacturer, you get guidance. Or when I worked at Ideal Toy, there's no guidance, or very little in those days. When I worked there, they had a game and toy and doll inventing department. And that's where I went to work when I first came to Ideal Toy, in that department. And I created a number of games that ended up on the shelf. And so that is one way of developing a game internally.
Yeah.
There's another way. There are today hundreds of independent game, toy, doll inventors scattered around the world. Mm-hmm. And they will create something, hopefully that's never been done before, that'll get the attention of gatekeepers, that every manufacturer has people that interview inventors from all around the world. Well, they used to do it face-to-face. Nowadays,
do it on Skype,
because of the internet, there's no need for face-to-face, unless it's through Skype.
Yeah.
So you hook up to a manufacturer's. I call them gatekeepers. They have various titles, but it's their job to bring the new game, toy, doll inventions into their marketing department internally for evaluation. And often they will see 3,000 games, because there's so many game and toy inventors, and they'll accept maybe 200-300 for review internally. And then when it gets inside, there's a number of people that participate in the evaluation of the game, trying to pick out the best one or two or three from this accumulation that is sent in. And they're generally sent in today with 30-second videos that they make. The inventors make 30-second videos. Some of them, through the Skype presentation process, show the actual three-dimensional product that they've created. And when the interviewer, the gatekeeper, sees something in it, they say, well, okay, send the three-dimensional product in, or send the 30-second video in. And that's what they do internally, or that's what they use internally to evaluate the creation of the game inventor community. They more or less, there's another way. Often, games are invented by toy and game inventing companies. They have people internally to invent product and ideas, and then that company or organization or employs 2 or 3, 4 different inventors, and they present the creation to the gatekeeper. So there's a number of ways to get an idea in front of the marketing people that work internally, that determine what it is that they're going to introduce that year.
Yeah. You know, I guess it surprises me that this kind of a game is still in business, because most of what you hear on the TV or on the line, it's some sort of video game. And,
okay.
I would have imagined that those video games would have taken over the market, and these kind of games have gone by the wayside. And so what's keeping them alive?
There are a number of different categories in just games alone, because that's what we're talking about this morning, or whenever. There are card games, board games, children's skill and action games. There are video games. There are internet games. There are so many categories that are offered to the public, and the market is very segmented, and it seems that every year the segments are getting smaller and smaller and smaller.
Toys R Us has had a real tough time. I think they've shut down a bunch of stores, and they would be one of the normal outlets for games like this, I would imagine.
Yeah, well, since Toys R Us went bankrupt, whatever they were selling is now sold by various other...
Yeah, there's other people trying to fill in the gap.
Primarily today, Amazon sells the majority of games, but Walmart, Target, and big companies like that also sell a lot of games. And often the consumer is exposed to the idea, game, whatever, either through word of mouth or television commercials, or often it can be a program. For example, a TV show or a movie becomes a license, like Toy Story.
Yeah.
There's a number of products that came from the movie itself, and sold all around the world. And Star Wars is an example, primarily toys for Star Wars, and not that many games, but
yeah, I did find
there's so many different ways for the consumer to have access to the knowledge that maybe their child would be interested in the product. Often the children themselves hear about it. So word of mouth is very important.
When you mentioned these are in the category of skill and action games, what kind of skills are you trying to develop with some of these games? What age groups are you thinking of?
Okay, I don't know how it happened, but I have been very narrow in my creativity. Some people do a variety of different categories, but most inventors specialize. I don't know if it's by choice, but just by acceptance of the marketplace. So you have inventors that do a card game like Magic the Gathering. It was very popular about 25 years ago, and still is. Some inventors do strategic games. For example, Axis and Allies. The inventor of Axis and Allies lives in our area, and he continues to specialize in that category. There are inventors that specialize in dolls, specialize in three-dimensional games, skill and action games, some specialize in music games. I kind of was more successful in children's skill and action games, young children, because I believe my mind is more in keeping with the younger kids than it is with more sophisticated game lovers.
Yeah, I guess you get into a niche where everybody recognizes.
Yeah, and it's a niche that it's not that we choose it, it's that the marketplace has said, Rene, you are a young children's game inventor.
Yeah.
And that's what I've done now for 50, 60 years.
Yeah. So what are you working on now?
Well, when I retired
giving away proprietary secrets.
I came to work at Parker Brothers in 1980, worked for them for 12 years, and retired at age 62 for Parker Brothers. Went into business for myself, working at home in my basement. I had a shop in my basement. And the first 10 years, I made some money. The second 10 years, I lost money. So I quit. So I left the game inventing behind me. And about 5, 6 years ago, a friend of ours at the YMCA, Ron Majors,
Yeah.
he said, Rene, why don't we try one more time?
Mm-hmm.
And I hadn't thought about games for 5, 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, okay, I'll try one more time. So I joined his son, who has a shop in Ipswich, and he does models for a number of game inventors,
Mm-hmm.
toy inventors. And I became partners with him, and I work with him in the shop, his shop, and I have invented about 10 games that we have made videos of them. He's very competent at creating videos, and I use Ron Major's voice for the voiceover.
Okay.
And the critic, because we all need critics.
Oh,
you
yeah.
can't have too many other opinions, because I've often thought that anybody's opinion could constitute maybe 25,000 possible consumers.
Oh,
We don't know.
yeah.
So when I'm developing something, I expose the idea to a number of people, trying to get their reaction to it. And often they come up with an idea that makes your game better.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually you have to settle on something, and you make a model of it, then you make the video, and you contact the manufacturers. Some will interview you directly. They will come to this area
Mm-hmm.
and interview all the toy and game inventors in the area, and they will take their laptop with them, and the laptop has the 30 seconds videos in them.
Okay.
So recently I was interviewed by a major game manufacturer, and I showed him half a dozen different videos that Ross has made for us, and he picked 2 to review internally. So Ross gets on their website, and most of them have a similar opening or a similar way of working. They have a portal, I guess you would call it, where the game inventors send their videos to the manufacturers, and they have it distributed on their inside.
Internally in the company,
Yeah,
yes.
so people can review the invention at their own leisure, and every week or 2 weeks they get together and discuss which ones
Yeah.
they think are most interesting, and it goes from there. So
Well, how many inventors are in this area? Would you guess?
oh, I would say there's a half a dozen,
Yeah.
and as I mentioned, the inventor of Axis and Allies
Yeah.
specializes in that type of game.
Yeah.
Some inventors, like myself, specialize in young children's games.
Yeah.
So there's a number of different categories that the local inventors specialize in. Some do both, toys and games.
Yeah.
Ron Majors does both.
Yeah.
Very few can do both.
Yeah.
I'm certainly not one of them that can do both. I've only been successful with children's skill and action games.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people don't recognize that the game industry really got its start around here in Massachusetts between Parker Brothers and Monopoly, and everybody knows about Monopoly, and that's a game that goes back to Depression era times, and that was an educational type of game. Hey, guess what? This is how it happened, kind of thing. And then there's Milton Bradley out in Springfield. They're another really big outfit, and they got a bunch of games.
Yes.
Chutes and Ladders is, I guess, probably their most
The Game of
well-known.
Life is one of the more well-known games that came from Springfield and Milton Bradley.
Yeah.
What has happened in our industry, there's been a consolidation taking place, and both Parker Brothers and Milton Bradley were acquired by the Hasbro Corporation that are located in Pawtucket, Rhode Island.
Pawtucket.
Pawtucket, Rhode Island.
Yes, and it's Rhode Island.
So,
But anyway, being a native from the
so in the
area.
old days, before we made presentations on Skype and through 30-second videos, the game inventors would go to Pawtucket and present their games, three-dimensional, finished models. And
So Hasbro's been in the game business all along, and it's not something, I think of them mostly as a toy.
oh, you know, that's an interesting thing. Both Hasbro and Mattel out in California started by Mattel, the two creators of the Mattel Corporation. One was named Matt something, and the other one was Elliot. So they combined Elliot and Matt to
the name
create
came from.
Mattel.
Yeah.
Well, they were in the framing business, and when you do framing, you have a lot of bits and pieces of very interesting wooden frame left over.
Oh, the molding,
Yeah. So they decided, well, let's do something with them, and they started a business selling kits where the bits and pieces were used to create something else by the consumer.
Okay.
The Hasbro Corporation was started by the Hasenfeld brothers, and they were in the leather business. And they too had hundreds and hundreds of these bits and pieces of leather. And they said, well, why toss them? Why don't we put them in kits so the consumer can do something with this leather? For example, when I was a kid, I had a wooden, they used to sell a kit where they had pictures on wood, and then you had a burning, like
wood
a soldering
set.
iron,
Yeah.
and a
I
wood
had one of
burning
those.
set.
Yeah.
Well, the Hasenfeld brothers did that with leather.
Oh, okay.
So from those beginnings, you have the Mattel Corporation and the Hasbro Corporation today.
Interesting where they come from, yeah. In this area, I guess, is a lot of different manufacturing. You think of it as the textiles up along the St. Lawrence, on Lawrence and Lowell area, and Rhode Island was all textiles, and most of those businesses went south after World War II, and something else filled in. I know Providence was noted for costume jewelry, and we were talking the other day about some of the ingenuity of the fool. You're trying to make something goof-proof. And I always remember the story as some kid working at Coro was working on riveting daisies onto a piece of costume jewelry. And it's got just in and out of the riveting machine. He came out of work one day with a daisy in his thumb that got him. So there's a lot of industry around that did some different kinds of things. And you think about the word game, and we've been talking about one particular facet. You mentioned a few. And you start to think about how many different kinds of games there are. And it can go from something, the title that I used for the show, the games people play, comes from a book by Dr. Eric Byrne in '64. And it's all about mental games. How do you portray yourself? What do you think how do you present yourself to different people? And what kind of interaction you're having? Is it a game?
Yeah,
And
okay. The party games, such as charades, the telephone game,
yeah,
and those kind of games that originally started, there's no one, I don't know, there's any way to find out if anybody ever invented the original telephone game or any of those party games. They were in our culture, and game inventors or manufacturers decided, well, why not take those concepts and put them in a box,
yeah,
and sell them,
yeah,
as in a more organized way with,
yeah,
rules and directions.
Well,
and so the telephone game has taken many different forms over the years, but
yeah,
the latest one is called Telestration. I played it this last Thanksgiving with my family, and it's fantastic. And
yeah,
then the games, like there was a series of games about 25, 30 years ago, like Taboo, where you weren't supposed to use certain words in describing things.
Oh, we got that now. It's called Politically Correct. The other thing that I got out of that book by Dr. Eric Byrne is what most of life is structuring time. And would you believe it, we've structured very, very effectively about 30 minutes. So we're at about the end of the line. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching. Hope you've found something interesting in this evening's discussion. And since you're still primed to go again, I think we ought to do this some more. Good evening. Take care. Have fun.